Hello darlings, I'm happy you're here. Today we are covering a regular notebook. So if you have a notebook where you really like the paper or the binding, you like just the quality of the notebook, but it's kind of boring, or maybe you just want to make it a little more fun, you want to change it for yourself, I thought I would do a tutorial because I needed to do this for myself. I found some of the most beautiful antique French fabrics that range from the early Napoleon III, so like 1830s, all the way up to about 1910. I showed these in the scroll diary tutorial I did last week and asked y'all which fabric was the best and I should use in a future project, and it was pretty close between the pink and pink and the black and pink, and then all of a sudden a whole bunch of people voted for the black and pink, which I was kind of rooting for by myself. I just feel like it's going to cover this black moleskine beautifully, and so I'm really excited to get started with this project. So this notebook, it has beautiful watercolor paper. It doesn't bleed through when you paint, and I love it. But as you can see, I have only painted in it once, which I did film. I'll link that video in the description box below. But it was for Ephemera Society. I was creating a digital so that it was like the theme of Ferris was that month, and so I thought I'd make a little printable of a bunch of these where you could print them out and make a notepad, because lists soothe me. I make lists all the time. I love a good notepad. So I created this digital for them to create their own notepad, and it's the last thing that I painted in it, and I don't know if it's intimidation or what it has been that I haven't sat down and used this lovely notebook, but I'm hoping covering it in something a little more inspirational than the very sleek black look will inspire me more to work on it. So what you're going to need is the notebook that you want to cover, obviously, and the fabric that you want to use. This kind is a piqué type French cotton, but I imagine this would work with most fabrics as long as they are very smooth. Quilting fabric would probably work the best. And then you're going to need some sort of paper to cover on the inside once you get the fabric placed down. This is another digital that I have on my Patreon for Ephemera Society. I have a whole printable library on there. I create a new one every month, and they are accessible in both the lower and upper tiers. So I will leave that linked below for you as well if you want to check that out. I just printed this on a pretty cream linen paper. I love linen paper and cotton paper. The textures are so nice, and the matteness is very nice. So I always like using fancy papers for things that are a long-term project. It did prove to be a little difficult to cut folded over though, I guess because it's thicker, but I wanted a thicker paper because it's going to stand up to wear better than a typical regular piece of printer paper. So you're going to want to trace this out. You're going to probably do some extra cutting as you fit it to your book, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Now, if you have a notebook that has the elastic band on it and you want to keep the elastic band, you could do this same thing, but just leave the elastic band and cut a small line in your fabric and then glue it back down to be able to pull the elastic through the fabric that you're covering the journal with. But as I said, the elastic was getting kind of on my nerves because it didn't lay flat very well, and the elastic didn't fit the old aesthetic that I wanted, and we are aesthetic trash on this channel, so you know, it wasn't. If I do decide to add something later, it'll be a ribbon that just wraps around, and it will serve the same purpose but look more vintage. We also know that Ashley doesn't really make a whole lot of real measurements with numbers. So I eyeball most of the things that I make because that's just how my brain works. When I try to measure things, it turns out worse, and I don't know why. But if I had to guess, I'm gonna say it's probably about 1.5 inches, 3-ish centimeters for the rest of the world who watches my videos. Around, or maybe 2.5 centimeters around the edge of the notebook, because you're going to need to trim it to make sure the lines are straight, as well as be able to fold it over and have enough space to really adhere to the inside of the book. You don't want the edges to come popping off after you glue them. At this point, you want to go ahead and iron your fabric so that it doesn't have any wrinkles in it, so that it lays nice and flat, because if you have wrinkles at this stage, it's going to give you wrinkles after you glue it. And just keep in mind as you're centering everything that that spine is going to take up however wide your spine is, and if there are little divots in it. Mine doesn't have that, it's a smooth spine. But it's going to take up a little extra fabric space when you glue it flush with the edge of the cover. So just keep that in mind as you're either open the book up completely and lay it down to figure out where the center is, or kind of do what I did and make sure you take account for the spine. And then trim any little extra pieces you have. This is the glue that I used. It's some fancy bookbinding glue that I found at an art supply store, but it basically acts like extra sticky school glue. I don't see why school glue wouldn't work. So if that's what you have, use it. I don't think it's going to be an issue. And then you'll need a paintbrush to paint it on as evenly as you can and try to remove any really severe excess lines that you find. This part is really fun and messy, so fully enjoy this part when you're doing it. So once you have the side fully covered in glue, you want to very carefully lay your fabric over. I used my trusty bone folder to try to smooth out any wrinkles I had. I did it wrong this way. Don't do it vertically. Do it horizontally towards the edge of the open side of the fabric. I did it right on the other side, but my brain was just like, well, with paper, it doesn't matter which way you go. No, it matters with fabric. You have to go with the grain and towards wherever the excess of the fabric is sitting. This project, I was kind of thinking while I was working on it of the whimsification factor. I am trying to add whimsy into normal things that I do in my life. That is, my word of the year is whimsy, and being focused on that has actually made a lot of things that I would usually like discipline myself about, that need to stop being lazy, or I need to, you know, invest in this more because I've spent money on it, or because I've done this or that. And adding whimsy in it, finding a way to make something pleasurable or more beautiful or silly or any of these things has made me feel so much more relaxed in my everyday life. And a lot of times it doesn't require buying anything. It requires just changing a little something to make the perspective more engaging. And it's been a wonderful process. So this is something that's really a simple project to do, and I hope it does the same for you. Once you have everything smoothed out, to deal with the corners and gluing those down, you have two options. You can do what I'm doing, which is kind of just cutting the corner off the little half moon shape, and this will give you less bulk on the ends of the corners. That's why I like this method. But you could also just cut a diagonal line straight from the edge of the corner into the center of the book, or into the actual corner of the edge of the book, and fold them over that way. But as I said, I prefer the less bulk with this way. You'll also need to make 2 cuts at the very edges of the spine of your book. This is going to, don't cut them short yet, leave them long, but just cut them to where you can fold down the wider pieces that go on the outside part of the covers. And we will come back to this part, but you need to have that space so that the other pieces are going to lay down underneath the cover page. And again, we're adding a little more glue on the edges here. You don't want to go too overboard, because then you'll have glue leaking through the fabric and kind of making a mess. But just enough to get it to lie down. And again, I got ahead of myself. You'll want to brush this on as best you can, just to make sure the glue is spread out nice and neatly, and it will prevent bubbling in the fabric later as it dries. Now, where the fabric overlays in the corners, don't be afraid to add a little more glue to make sure that they lie down correctly. And if you have any extra bits hanging off that are creating bulk or that will prevent the book from lying flat or closing flat on the creases and the corners, clean that up as much as you can. Don't worry too much about what this phase looks like, because we are going to be covering this with your either printed paper, or if you want to get some of that real fancy handmade paper, they have it like Paper Source or anything like that, that would be good here. It just needs to be a really thick paper. It's up to you on how much of the fabric is seen on the interior side of the cover. I wanted a little bit of a margin there between that and the cover paper, so I cut my edges just a little bit, just a few millimeters, to give a more uniform appearance to the inside covers of the journal. So I tried to use the same adhesive, the bookbinding glue that I used for the fabric, with the interior paper, cover papers. It warped it so badly. So maybe it's because I used the linen paper, it wouldn't be as like that with a more cotton type paper. But I used my trusty zip dry that does not warp paper because it's not water based to do this part. It did warp on the edges a little bit because some of the moisture from the fabric got through the fabric to the paper, but it straightened out after it was dry. So I would recommend doing it this way if the warping bothers you, or if you don't have the right kind of paper to avoid that with the regular PVA glue. But yeah, again, it's up to you how you feel about that. And here I'm just smoothing out all of the bubbles, but as well as spreading the glue out. You can't use a paintbrush with the zip dry glue because it will ruin the brush, but it will also stick to the brush. Like, it dries so quickly. The name is true to form. So using the bone folder to, or a popsicle stick or something, to spread out the glue and to create a smooth surface is the best way to get the paper to stick. Now your final step here is to trim off just a little bit of the fabric on the spine, just enough so that you can flip that fabric down into the spine. You'll want to add some of that PVA glue again, not too much, just enough to make it sticky, and use either the end of your paintbrush or the point on your bone folder and open the book and push it down into the spine so that it sticks. Once you do this on both sides, I would set something heavy on top of the closed book, like a couple of other books, just regular reading books or textbooks or whatever you have, and let it dry overnight. And that way you won't have any bubbling or warping, or if you do, it'll be to a minimum, and your book will train the shape and be closed well whenever you remove it. It worked really well for mine. So if you enjoyed this tutorial and you're not already following me, I'd love to see you back next Sunday. I post a new video every week. Sometimes it's this type of tutorial that has to do with paper or fabric, and other times it is a journal with me type of video. Sometimes I talk, sometimes I do a quiet ASMR. They are all supposed to be cozy and relaxing. So I hope to see you then. If you liked this video, please send it to somebody that you maybe liked. Use the little share button below. That really helps out my channel, and I'd love to make new friends. So I hope you enjoyed this, friends. Thank you so much for being here, and if you make it to the end, let me know in the comments if you plan to do this with one of your notebooks, and also some sort of flower emoji, just so that I know you were able to stay till the end. I really appreciate it. I will see y'all next week. Have a wonderful creative week, friends. Bye.